News Talk KVNU.
The information from the pretty balanced perspective.
Online at kvnutalk.com and on the KVNU mobile app.
KVNU News Time is 5:05. I'm Bill Walter with this news update brought to you by Roof Rescue. A 29-year-old Wellsville man has been arrested for allegedly physically harming a woman during a domestic dispute. According to law enforcement, Eric Michael Hall was booked into the Cache County Jail Sunday morning. According to the arrest report, Cache County Sheriff's deputies were called to a Wellsville home on reports of a verbal domestic dispute in progress. As they approached the residence, they heard a male individual say something about choking another person. Deputies knocked on the door and rang the doorbell, but no one answered. As they looked in the window, they could see a female with severe head injuries that was bleeding profusely. A man, later identified as Hall, was sitting on a couch next to the alleged victim. The suspect appeared to be holding the woman down, prompting the deputy to draw their firearm and point it toward Hall while ordering him to come to the door. Hall complied and let deputies in the door. He was placed in handcuffs and taken into custody. Deputies reported the victim was covered in blood and was bleeding profusely from multiple head injuries. Her eyes were almost completely swollen shut. She also appeared to have a broken nose, multiple cuts on her face. Paramedics transported the woman to the hospital. KVNU News Time is 5:06. KVNU weather for tonight. Mostly clear skies. Our overnight low tonight in the upper 30s. And then plenty of sunshine tomorrow and Thursday, and really right on to the end of the week, into the weekend, upper 70s for the high tomorrow. It's been to 72. It's 71 right now at KVNU. KVNU weather brought to you by Top Job Asphalt. They specialize in asphalt paving and maintenance, as well as concrete installation and repair.
This is Mark with Roof Rescue. Most of us don't think about our roofs very often until you see shingles on the ground or water drips through your ceiling. Keep your roof in tip-top shape to protect your home, your biggest investment. Roof Rescue uses only the highest quality materials with experienced workmanship guaranteed to last. Even if you were denied by your insurance company the first time, a free re-evaluation can be made. Visit roofrescueusa.com to schedule your free consultation in Cache Valley and surrounding areas. Roof Rescue, providing watertight peace of mind.
KVNU News Time is 5:07. Appearing on KVNU's For the People program on Monday, along with U.S. Senator for Utah Mike Lee, were Kansas Senator Roger Marshall and Utah State Senator Chris Wilson. Marshall says he sees a lot of similarities of his state with Utah.
It's very similar. You know, we take the drive here and we see alfalfa and cattle and dairies, and this is a college city here in Cache County. It reminds me of Manhattan, Kansas, Kansas State University, another ag school. So it's great to be here with a group of the people we've interacted with are educated. And, you know, people ask, well, why are you here with Senator Lee? Mike and I share so many of the same values like faith and family and community.
Utah State Senator Chris Wilson talked about why he has endorsed Mike Lee.
As I've talked to many constituents here in Cache Valley, a lot of times on a daily basis, and a lot of their concerns are obviously what he's talked about, inflation. And the other thing that they've really talked about is the federal overreach. And boy, now more than ever, I really believe that we need Senator Lee back in Washington, trying to push back on the federal overreach. There's only so much we can do in the state. Obviously, we're doing what we can to push back on the Biden administration and some of their policies.
Wilson encouraged all the people in his district to make sure they fill out their ballots and vote. Lee is being challenged by independent candidate Evan McMullen. And police are investigating after a student claimed they were drugged and sexually assaulted at a University of Utah fraternity house. The university said a student went to the Pi Kappa Alpha house on Thursday and remembers feeling sick, nauseous, and as if they had been drugged, according to an alert release. When the student was taken to the hospital, they reported that they had been sexually assaulted at the fraternity house Hospital staff and University Police Department contacted the Salt Lake City Police Department about the allegations. Fox 13 reports that because the fraternity is located off campus, Salt Lake City Police are now leading the investigation. Right now, 71 degrees, KBNU News Time 5:10. For more details on these and other stories, visit CashValleyDaily.com.
Sean Hannity from 1 till 4 on News Talk KVNU 102 FM and 610 AM.
This is Jay Allen with Allen Mortuaries. From our family to yours, thank you for voting Allen Mortuaries Best Funeral Home of Northern Utah and Best Funeral Home of Cache Valley. We sincerely appreciate the confidence and trust your family has given us over the past 83 years. When you trust us with the final preparations of your loved one, you get the kind of caring, personalized service you can only expect from a family-owned funeral home. It's our family serving yours. Voted Best Funeral Home of Cache Valley in Northern Utah, Allen Mortuaries. Then, now, always.
Ready for our little forest adventure?
Yes! Go outside, I wanna be. So much waiting for me. Yeah, I wanna go outside, I wanna be.
We're here.
Whoa, that was fast.
There's a forest closer than you think. Find a park or forest near you and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by USDA Forest Service and the Ad Council.
We are there in your community. Small business owners, mechanics, police officers, homemakers. And we are there serving our nation in the Air Force Reserve. When medical emergencies arise, we meet the challenge. In cybersecurity, protecting and defending in cyberspace. When natural disasters happen, we are there in space. As a strong part of the nation's defense, we are there in the community and we are there for our nation. We share a vision to make a difference, united and focused, taking pride in being there in service of our country. We are Reserve Citizen Airmen, and we are there with over 180 different jobs to serve your country. Air Force Reserve.
Feels like Tuesday. Tuesday has no feel.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People, Hour 2 of today's show. It is time for this month's installment of the For the People Book Club. Our good friend Gregg Petersen here in the studio. And Craig and I have been talking. He's been traveling quite a bit. We talked a little bit about time we both spent in Bear Lake. And Craig, I've been saying to everyone that Logan Canyon leaves are not at their peak yet. And I don't want to be wrong. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I don't know. I came through today, and they look good.
It's amazing.
But whether or not that's peak or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I hate to get this wrong because I hate to feel like thousands of people out there might hear me and wait until the weekend and then miss them all. But I don't think that'll happen. But yeah, just beautiful through there. I'm excited about this. So what you've brought to the book club this week is a bit different, and gives us an opportunity to kind of go in a bunch of different directions too. I've linked to it on our Facebook page, but for listeners, it's Gregg Jenner's Ask a Historian, and this is it's a collection of essays. Is that a fair way to describe it? Or
50 Q&As.
Really?
There are questions that people have asked him, and he responds to them. He bills himself.
So cool.
He bills himself as a public historian. I think what that means is he doesn't have a regular job.
Yeah.
So he writes books and does stuff. But supposedly people write in and say, "I'd like to know about this," and so he researches it, and it took 50 of them and put it together in his book.
That's amazing.
So today the idea is not so much to promote the book as just to talk about some kind of quirky and fun ideas. One of my friends said, "What you can do today is just a scattering of ideas," right? And
I love it, though.
I said, "Well, maybe not scattering. Let's say potpourri."
I like that. Potpourri fits, makes it sound, fancies it up a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I love it because that's what I think a book like this, or books like this in general, have that effect on me. They get me thinking about a bunch of different things. And obviously when it comes to history, there's never a time, I think, when a single individual, no matter how studied they might be, can say, all right, I know it all. I've read it all. I've seen it all. There's always some aspect of history, current or ancient, whatever it might be, that you didn't know, or a myth. That's one I run into a lot. Things I've believed my whole life, and then I read something, and it's like, oh, that never actually played out that way. In fact, just recently I read one about the Trojan horse, and about how the story goes there were hundreds of soldiers in the horse, and that's not how they would have done it.
It's a big horse.
Yeah, it would have been a huge horse. It would have been more like 5 elite soldiers, and their job would have just been to get in and open the gate. Yeah. But that's a less dramatic story.
Interesting enough, the first thing we're going to talk about today is exactly that. It's a myth. That's not true.
Oh, really?
Yeah. By the way, there's a book I'm just starting to read. It's called "Lies My Teacher Told Me."
Oh, I've seen that. That's actually in my Audible queue.
Yeah.
That's one of my next ups. Well, I'm 3 books to go before I can get to that one. What do you think?
I just barely started it. It's actually in my Audible queue. I usually don't do Audibles, but I did this one. Yeah.
That's
my wife gave me earbuds for Father's Day, so I've started doing a lot more audiobooks. I really like it.
That's what got me, honestly. Those little wireless headphones.
Oh, they're great.
But yeah, this it's one that it's 3 books away from the top for me.
It's 18 hours, by the way.
That's a commitment for me right now. I've been into the 8-9 hours books, but no, this fascinates me because I've run into this a lot. Talking. It's kind of a contemporary thing that gets discussed around certain cultural issues too. Discussions over racism and things like that. Even what we were taught in school, and I wouldn't say that we were misled, but a lot of times things were very sanitized, or important details were left out because they were ugly and unpleasant.
But sanitized. I wrote a couple of high school textbooks, and they go through these review committees, and one of these was kind of designed to go to Texas, and it was very constrained in terms of what they wanted there. So I think sanitized is a pretty good description.
Really?
Of a lot of high school textbooks, yeah.
Where they take out the unpretty stuff and
and what they find to be pretty in Texas is quite different than it would be in Massachusetts.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. That's and unfortunately that for a lot of people is their start and end of exposure to history. And even if you go on to college, even at a university, depending on what area of study you're headed towards, you might not be exposed to more. I feel lucky because I went through an absolute obsession a few years ago with historians and their books, and I read and listened to everything that I could, and my main takeaway from that was that there was a lot I didn't know about things I thought I knew everything about. So,
and it changes over time. With new materials. The LDS Church is a perfect example with additional materials being discovered. The historical perspective changes over time.
Sure.
As we become more knowledgeable about what's out there.
That's an interesting aspect, too, because you see this play out when that does happen within the LDS Church or any large religious organization. There are oftentimes cries of heresy, and people resist accepting the new change. That also happens in academic history as well, right?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, Jason, who do you think, this guy's name's Gregg Jenner, he's British. What woman do you think he's asked about most often? And this would be in English, a British.
As a British?
And obviously it's going to be a member of the royal family.
Yeah, I would say, I would say especially recently, but I would say Queen Elizabeth or Margaret Thatcher. One of those two for a British historian.
Anne Boleyn.
Really?
By far.
Wow.
By far.
Does he explain why?
Yeah.
That's surprising.
Well, she played such a pivotal role in British history. And what I want to talk about, you talked about the notion of a myth, and here's what he asks about. He says, did Anne Boleyn really have 6 fingers? You ever heard that?
That's right, I've heard that.
That's become established fact, hasn't it? Yeah.
Believed it my whole life. I feel like I'm about to have that myth busted.
I think it's a good possibility. I think the story of Anne Boleyn is really an important one. And there was actually a special on PBS. It finished about a month ago. It's a 3-part special, and it was on the Boleyn family, because all you ever hear about is her.
Sure.
But it turns out she has a brother who ultimately was executed because he was accused of having an adulterous relationship with her, which wasn't true.
Sure.
But the whole family were a bunch of social climbers. And as her status improved, the family status improved. And they went from being just kind of an ordinary family to being right at the center of British politics. And, of course, when she went down, they all went down. The brother was executed. The dad ends up being just kind of exiles from court.
Sure.
But the author starts out, he has this little sentence in the book, and he says, Anne Boleyn wasn't actually considered the hottest woman at court. Her charms were more mental and personal than physical. But she wasn't unattractive either. And this PBS special, it's kind of a dramatized situation. It's a documentary, but it's dramatized.
Oh, okay.
And the woman who portrays her is a woman who you would consider to be mildly attractive.
Okay.
And that's borne out by history. But the thing that was interesting about her is her dad saw her as kind of a vehicle for him to get ahead. And so her teenage years were spent not in England, but in France. And she grew up in the French court. He arranged for that.
Interesting.
And so what happened is she spent probably 7 or 8 years in the early part of her life in France. And so when she came back, she was cultured and exotic, and she stood out compared to these kind of bland, vulgar English women.
That makes sense.
And I think that was part of Henry's attraction for her.
So not necessarily of being wowed physically, but she stood out. She was unique when she came back.
Yeah, she was bright. She was very bright, and she was cultured and witty and so forth.
Sure.
She actually had a younger sister who had been Henry's mistress, and for a while, and then, like he did often with the mistresses, that he discarded her. But what's kind of interesting about her too, you know, the story is, of course, that he was married to Catherine of Aragon. He was married to her for about 20 years. That was his first wife.
Yeah.
She couldn't bear any children, and so he decided, I've got to have an heir, because for a king, that's the most important thing. You've got to have an heir. And so he started looking around, had a bunch of mistresses. That didn't work out. And then met Anne and was just absolutely entranced by her. Her sister was not really smart because she just became a mistress. Anne held out, and she refused to go to his bed until after she was his wife. And
Really?
she frustrated him for about 2 years. And it went on and on and on. No. She was really very clever. The other thing that's really interesting that people don't realize about her, they think Henry just kind of dumped the Catholic Church and established his own church just so he could get Anne Boleyn. And there's some truth to that.
That's what I remember being taught.
But it's a little more complicated than that, because it wasn't just something that Henry just all of a sudden decided to do. It turns out Anne Boleyn and her family had strong Protestant leanings. And so all the time that she was married to Henry VIII, she actually was putting Protestant dogma in his ear. Actually gave him a book that if anybody else had that book in England, they could have been executed for it because it was illegal.
Just for owning it.
Yeah. But day after day, she fed him this anti-Catholic information until finally he probably believed it, but also realized this is a great solution to me. I'm just going to get them. He wanted to get the marriage annulled. The Pope wouldn't annul the marriage. They did it time and time again. In fact, her father was actually sent to the Pope to try to get an annulment, which probably wasn't a good choice.
Interesting.
But the Pope continually refused to do that. And so finally Henry VIII said, nuts to you, I'll just form my own church. But it wasn't just out of the clear blue. It was because he had been kind of fed this by Anne. But let's get to the point about the 6 fingers, okay? Because that's kind of the intriguing part about this. They also claimed that she was a witch, and they also claimed some other things about her. But it turns out, so here's what happened. So Henry then initiates the Reformation, creating the Church of England.
Sure.
Anne's downfall was she initially has a daughter. And that's not great, because daughters are not what you need as a king. You need a son.
Sure.
She had a couple of miscarriages. A couple of those were sons. And finally, Henry realizes she's probably not to give him a son. So that's where he starts looking along. And ultimately, he's got to find a reason to get rid of her. And so he conjures up charges of adultery and treason. And she's executed in this famous beheading on a block near the Tower of England.
Yeah.
And
I remember reading that it was considered merciful because they let her choose a sword instead of an axe.
They actually brought it,
and that was a big thing.
Yeah, they actually brought in a guy from France who was more proficient of his job, because you think of this as being one swap and they're done. A lot of times they end up being kind of chop, chop, chop.
Yeah,
it was kind of a gruesome affair. But at any rate, so her this daughter that she had ends up being Elizabeth I. Okay. And Elizabeth I was a Protestant queen.
Sure.
And there was a Catholic priest, and the Catholics at this point in time are kind of on the outside group, and he hates Elizabeth I, and so he wants to somehow discredit Elizabeth I, and he decides he can do that by discrediting her mother. And so, and this is 50 years after Anne's death. He writes a book, and it's one of those books that becomes kind of fake media, and it's reprinted over 100 years.
Interesting.
And in the book, this is what he writes. He says, Anne Boleyn was rather tall of stature, with black hair and an oval face of sallow complexion, as if troubled with jaundice. She had a projecting tooth under the upper lip, and on her right hand 6 fingers. There was a large boil under her chin, and therefore, unable to hide its ugliness, she wore a high dress covering her throat. So the author, this guy kind of made Anne Boleyn
kind of describing like one of those cartoon witches
from
the Warner Brothers.
He actually made Nanny McPhee look like Miss Universe.
Yeah, that's right. That's funny.
But so this book that was written 50 years after was the first one to complain that she had 6 fingers, and contemporaries actually mentioned that, and it turns out what she probably had was a wart on her little finger.
Yeah.
But this guy was able to perpetuate this because of this popular book. So it's not true, but it was something that has become kind of standard fare as we talk about Anne Boleyn.
That's a great example, too, of how one, because there are a lot of other things written, but how this one thing becomes popular, and then it becomes the known and understood history, but none of it was ever true. That's fascinating to me. This is... the book we're discussing again is Ask a Historian, a collection of Q&A transcripts by popular historian Gregg Jenner. It's available everywhere. I've linked to some of the places you can get it locally and online on our Facebook page. It's the For the People Book Club with our good friend Craig Petersen here in the studio, and we'll be back right after this.
Which is better, a hammer or a screwdriver? It depends if you have a nail or a screw. At Top Job Asphalt, they know that, and it's not one size fits all. With a variety of services and products, they can meet any pavement need and budget. Call 764-0451 and let their pavement experts give you a free estimate on any asphalt job. Best products, best services, guaranteed. 764-0451 or TopJobAsphalt.com. Choose the best. Choose Top Job Asphalt.
This is Sheriff Chad Jensen. OHVs are a lot of fun, but they also come with a lot of responsibility. Please make sure you are familiar with Utah State Code as well as your local ordinances before you head onto the roadways or head up into the canyons. You may notice more deputies in the canyon areas. Our traffic unit will be out ensuring that everyone is following the regulations. We want everyone to be safe, have fun, share the roads, share the canyons, and share the trails. Check out our Facebook page for some helpful links to find Utah OHV State Code as well as many of our local city ordinances.
Wednesday edition Clay Travis Buck Sexton Show. We'll continue to track it. Under 5 weeks, just a little bit over a month until the midterms. We'll be joined by Washington Senate candidate Tiffany Smiley. Plus, Buck.
We'll also dive into all the most competitive races and some of those GOP long shot opportunities that will be an essential component of the coming red wave. That's coming up on Clay and Buck.
10 to 1 on News Talk KVNU, 102 FM and 610 AM.
I'm Henry the Eighth, I am. Henry the Eighth, I am. I got married to the widow next door. She's been married 7 times before, and everyone was an Henry. She wouldn't have a Willie or a Sam. No, Sam. I'm her 8th old man, I'm Henry. Henry the Eighth, I am.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People. Good choice, considering here we're the era we're talking about here. We've been talking about Anne Boleyn, myths and myth busting done by a man that describes himself as a popular historian, Gregg Jenner, who is the author of the book Ask a Historian, a collection of Q&A transcripts with Jenner himself in book form. It's widely available online, local bookstores, and more. So if you'd like to get it, links on our Facebook page. But it's the topic of this month's For the People Book Club with our good friend Craig Petersen. And let's see, we just left off at Anne's 5 fingers, not 6, despite what we've all been told. But that's a great example of some things that catch on because of one source, and then it's almost like people want to believe it. It's a more exciting story. It makes for retelling, or fancier retelling. Sometimes history is kind of boring. The actual history, so-and-so lived and they died. So they throw some things in the middle, like 6 fingers and third nipples and things like that.
I think the other thing that happened, too, is at that point in time, you probably didn't have 100 books on Anne Boleyn.
Sure.
And so there was this one, and it became popular,
sense.
and you just didn't have a lot of competing corrective sources.
That makes sense. Also, at the time, I think, actually, we should talk about this in the same context because it was like this not too long ago. But I think this was also a time when there were authorities, there were people who if they got maybe we should stick with talking about this in more of a contemporary sense because I think until recently, mainly because of the internet, I think the same attitude existed to where Gore Vidal. Great historian, but he left things out. That's one of the few criticisms that I have of him from his books that I've read, which are only some, and that other historians have criticized him for, is that he would just leave certain aspects out for storytelling concerns, to make it a compelling story. So he wouldn't get lost in the weeds on certain stuff because he wanted it to be something that could be digested by popular culture, which I don't think is wrong of a historian to do. But it does reinforce the idea that you should probably if there's something you really want to know everything about, you should probably read 2 or 3 books, right?
Yeah, most historians have a point of view.
Sure.
And that'll cause them to emphasize some things and not others. I'm just thinking about another historical myth. It's actually created in kind of the same way. Traditionally, how tall was Napoleon? What's kind of conventional wisdom as to how tall he was?
Very short. But I remember reading and at least having the concept of him being under 5 feet.
Yeah.
Ish.
He was actually 5'8".
Really?
He was
so
pretty
actually
near.
Wasn't that short?
No, that's about the average. In fact, that may have been a little bit over the average. But the same thing happened.
That's funny.
After he died, there were a critic of his who wanted to destroy his reputation, and so he portrayed him as being short. And actually, wasn't that way? It was actually a painting. And the painting gave a perspective of him being very, very short. And that's kind of come down to us in history. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I do remember reading about that. It's interesting to think about this because it's complex because I know with history, what we're dealing with this as a country right now, we have some darker moments in our history, and there are forces or movements at work now, not forces, that makes it sound evil, but movements at work now that say, we want our history to be taught more accurately for people to understand. I think of our good friend Darren Perry and the Northwestern Band, the Shoshone tribe. It wasn't that long ago that you couldn't find an accurate telling of the Bear River Massacre story, which would fall into more of the recent history category. And now, that story's out there, and everyone accepts, the less sanitized version. And that's been important to the tribes to tell that story. I get all of that. But then there's this other aspect of it where some things just didn't get written about a lot. And you have, Greek history, for example, you have 1 or 2 sources on most things.
Exactly.
And that you're not going to get more. They're long gone. So you assume people were telling the truth, right?
An example of Greek history. Oh, I've forgotten who it is. Who was it that wrote about Atlantis? You remember who it was that wrote about Atlantis? The Greek historian. It doesn't matter, but at any rate, he wrote that, and he talked about the lost city of Atlantis probably 1,000 years before he was alive. But that's the only source. We don't have additional information on that. Trojan War, you're talking about, same kind of thing.
Yeah.
All we have, particularly from ancient history, is what happened to survive. And there's no reason to assume that those were objective, accurate histories.
Sure. And there's every reason to assume they may be glorified a bit or built up a bit, like the Trojan horse story.
Sure.
It's not that exciting to say, 2 or 3 soldiers were stuffed in a wooden horse and pushed inside so they could open the gate from the inside. Instead, you talk about this horse that was big enough for an army, which likely never happened.
Yeah.
But it's still, this is also, I think, it kind of loops back in a way because now the myths become, and the myth making becomes a part of accurate history telling too, which is fascinating to me. And that kind of seems to be where this Jenner guy is coming from. Am I getting that?
I think so. One of the other things I always think about when I read history is a famous phrase that says that history is written by the victors. So they clearly, Julius Caesar wrote his memoirs of his times in Gaul, but he was the victor. Who knows what the other side might have written?
Yeah.
He wrote it to aggrandize himself.
That's sort of, we're seeing this with Putin and Russia right now, where, it's a reminder that we're not that far from the times when the victors literally burned the historical record and the history of the loser. So it was lost forever. And then the victor got to say what happened at that point. And that's kind of playing out, or there's an attempt to make things play out that way with Russia on Russia's part right now. But fascinating stuff. We're talking about history in a big, broad sense, talking about the book Ask a Historian, transcripts of many Q&As with popular historian Gregg Jenner. It's widely available. I've linked to places you can get it online and off, here locally even, on our Facebook page. Craig Petersen, our guest for the For the People Book Club, which continues right after this look at the news with KVNU's Bill Walter.
Thank you, Jason. KVNU News Time is 5:36, and the news is brought to you by Whole Tree Care. A candidate forum sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Cache Valley will be held Wednesday evening at the First Presbyterian Church of Logan. On KVNU's For the People program last week, Kendra Penry of the local chapter talked about why they wanted to do this.
We wanted to host a candidate forum so people can come out and ask questions and figure out who they want to vote for, not necessarily because of what party they represent, but because of the issues and what matters to people who live here in Cache Valley, to make sure that the person that holds office is able to speak to what matters to each person and can represent us effectively.
She said this is also so voters can hold candidates accountable if they are making promises or just telling others what they are going to accomplish while in office.
We are there to make sure that they follow through. And if that's why you're voting for them, you've got to know it up front, and then you can make sure your voice is heard come November.
Penry said they have a link on their Facebook page to submit questions ahead of time because not everyone is comfortable talking in front of others. The event runs from 6:30 to 7:30. The location is 178 West Center in Logan. You can get more information on their Facebook page or lwvutah.org/Cache Valley. The 15-year-old boy accused of entering the home of a random Taylorsville family and stabbing a man and woman allegedly told police he was trying to hurt someone. During a court appearance Monday, the teenager was charged with 2 counts of attempted aggravated murder and 1 count each of aggravated burglary, robbery, and possession of a dangerous weapon by a minor. New details in the document show what led up to the stabbing of J.J. and Ashley Dasher during the overnight hours on September 20th. The Dashers were sleeping in their Taylorsville home when the teen broke in just before 4 a.m. and began stabbing the couple. J.J. was stabbed 11 times and suffered a collapsed right lung before the boy chased after Ashley as she ran to a neighbor's home and began stabbing her 24 times. Both Dashers were hospitalized. They told Fox 13 on Monday that Ashley had been released from the hospital, and they are both expected to make full recoveries. Police say the 15-year-old left the area after stabbing the couple and was later located with blood on his hands, shoes, and clothing. When arrested, documents say the boy told police, "I just got caught," and, quote, "I was trying to hurt someone and ran away," end of quote. The teen said he woke up after 1 a.m. that morning and claimed he wanted to hurt someone, then went to the kitchen. He said he got ready like he was going to school and took his father's pocket knife and a large kitchen knife. Charging documents say the boy wandered around the neighborhood trying to open people's doors before finding an open door at the Dasher's house. And a federal judge has ordered Idaho and its prison medical care provider to pay more than $2.5 million in legal fees to a transgender inmate who sued after she was denied gender confirmation surgery. The cost, however, will not come out of taxpayer dollars. Instead, it will be covered by Horizon Correctional Health Care under a separate agreement with the state. Adri Edmo sued the state and the Idaho Department of Corrections health care provider Horizon in 2017, alleging that they were violating her Eighth Amendment right against cruel and unusual punishment by denying her gender confirmation surgery. She won the lawsuit and received the surgery in 2020. She was released from prison last year after serving a 10-year sentence for sexually abusing a 15-year-old boy. KBNU News Time is 5:40.
Remember last October's huge snowstorm that destroyed trees all over Cache Valley? Bobby and his crew at Hall Tree Care were the most popular guys in town. Not saying that will happen again. However, I just looked at the forecast for winter and it calls for snow. Snow can wreak havoc in your overgrown trees and shrubs, which can wreak even more havoc in your home and vehicles. Call Hall Tree Care before winter gets here. 760-6587. Ask about their radio discount. That's HULL Tree Care.
KVNU weather for tonight, mostly clear skies, overnight low in the upper 30s, sunny and upper 70s both tomorrow and Thursday. It's been to 72, it's 71 right now at KVNU. KVNU weather brought to you by Logan Dental Associates. Make your appointment at Logan Dental Associates with Dr. Paul Harris, Dr. Brandon Preby, Curtis Taylor, or Anthony Larson. Or if it's more convenient, visit them at their Cherry Creek Dental office in Richmond, a full-service dental office to take care of the entire family. For more details on these and other stories, visit CacheValleyDaily.com.
It's USU Homecoming Week, and you can show your Aggie pride with a stop at the Aggie fans' favorite place to shop, and that's Locker 42. They have a store full of everything Aggie. Aggie logo jackets and hoodies and long and short sleeve T-shirts. Pick out a new Aggie hat from dozens of hat choices as well. Game time temperatures will be cool, but you can stay warm with a plush Aggie blanket. Shop the Locker 42 location that's the most convenient for you. 1430 North Main next to Little Caesars, and the flagship store downtown at 36 South Main.
Hi, this is Gordon Deal. Wednesday on This Morning, America's First News. The next concern for some in southwest Florida goes beyond wind and water damage from Hurricane Ian. Given the housing crunch, many fear being homeless. Also, dealerships are finally getting more cars and trucks on their lots, but we've lost our mood to buy thanks to interest rates and other pressures. And the rudest things you can do as an airline passenger. Wednesday on This Morning, America's First News. From 4 to 6 on News Talk KVNU, 610 AM and 102 FM. Your station for news and talk.
I'm a wife and the mother of 2 kids, and I've got a good job.
Bye, Mom. See you, Mom.
A pretty important job. Because of my family and my job, I really care about this neighborhood. It's a good neighborhood. Yes, there's some crime. And when I drive to work, like now, I realize that some people here don't trust the police. So the police should be reaching out to this community, and this community should reach out to the police. That's the way to make this a safer place. And when I get to work in the precinct house and put on my uniform, I can tell you as a police officer that this department is reaching out to the community, and the community is doing its part. We're building partnerships. This should be happening everywhere. This is how we can all be safer. Get involved. Start the conversation.
Start the conversation and help stop crime. To learn the 5 things you can do, go to ncpc.org/prevent violent crime. A message from the National Crime Prevention Council and the Bureau of Justice Assistance.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People. It's the For the People Book Club with our friend Craig Petersen here in the studio. We're talking about, in general, history, but the book that triggered this conversation is called Ask a Historian, a collection of Q&A transcripts with popular historian Gregg Jenner. And you can find the book everywhere. I've linked to online and local options for you to buy it. And that's sent us down a road of historical myth-busting, talking about how history is written and understood. It really is a very broad topic. But during the break, you told me where you wanted to go next. And I don't want to delay that anymore because I'm so curious.
In just a few minutes, I'm going to share with your listening audience the funniest joke in the world. Seriously.
I'm excited about this.
So one of the questions that somebody asked him was, when was the first joke book written? And it turns out...
great question.
Yeah, it turns out the earliest joke that we know about was written in 1900 BC, but I couldn't begin to repeat it on the air.
Oh, really? So, of course, the first joke documented was
it was
a little bit racy.
There was a lot of toilet humor. The first joke book was about 300 BC, but unfortunately it's been lost. But here's a sample of some jokes from a joke book that was written in 500 of the current era, so 1,500 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And so just you're going to kind of grimace at some of these. Doctor, when I wake up, I feel dizzy for half an hour, and then I get better. Doctor, get up a half an hour later then. That's not too bad.
I actually like that.
A man meeting
1,500 years old. Wow.
Yeah, a man meeting an idiot, that's the parlance of the time, said, "Hey, that slave you sold me died." The idiot replied, "I swear to you that he never did that to me." A tired idiot, I'm sorry, that's the word, goes to bed without a pillow. Instead, he orders his slave to put a jar under his head. The slave says it'll be too hard. So the idiot says, "Well, stuff it with feathers then." And finally, from that joke book, an idiot, I don't know why they're all idiots, an idiot sees a friend and exclaims, "I heard you were dead." His buddy replies, "And yet you can see that I'm alive." The idiot answers, "Yeah, but the guy who told me is a lot more trustworthy than you are." That's not too bad, actually.
I like that one. I might actually repeat that one.
So, and now this actually wasn't in the book, but I'd read it someplace else, and so I'm gonna share it with you. The funniest joke in the world. Back in 2002, there was a researcher. He was a legitimate researcher, and he opened up a website called the Joke Lab. And what he invited people to do was to submit what they thought were the funniest jokes, and then for people to rate them. And over a period of time, he ended up getting 40,000 jokes.
Wow.
And 2 million ratings. And I think the way they did this is they had kind of an initial round, and then the ones that were highest rated, they resubmitted those, and then people would rate those. And finally they came with this joke, which is based on scientific research, quote unquote, the funniest joke in the entire world.
Interesting.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
It maybe says something about our society. It's not obscene, but it's... anyway, 2 hunters are out in the woods when one of them collapses. He doesn't seem to be breathing, and his eyes are glazed. The other guy whips out his cell phone and calls the emergency services. He gasps, "My friend is dead. What can I do?" The operator says, "Calm down. I can't help. First, let's make sure that he's dead." There's a silence. Then a gunshot is heard. Back on the phone, the guy says, "Okay, now what?" Well, I read that and I thought, really? Does that really come down as the best?
That was rated the 2 million ratings.
The funniest joke in the world.
That's actually a pretty funny joke, though.
But a little dark.
Yeah, that's right. Kind of dark. Not a happy ending.
Yeah.
That's
okay, Jason.
Funny.
Here, I'm going to ask you a fashion question because you're a connoisseur of high fashion.
Sure. Sitting here in the clothes I'm about to wear to the gym.
Should I describe?
I am. I'm wearing the shorts I'm wearing to the gym. My gym shirt, and I did put on a somewhat nice T-shirt, but yeah, T-shirt, shorts.
That's all relative.
Yeah, it's fancy at Planet Fitness. I'll tell you that.
I got it. So here's your fashion question. Okay, what is the purpose of women's high heels? There's actually a legitimate purpose as to why women wear high heels.
My understanding is just height, just to elevate them.
Makes their legs look longer.
Yeah, it makes it changes how they stand and that it stems from something that became popular a lot longer ago than I remember thinking was the case, because I always attributed high heels to be something of the sort of the Marilyn Monroe era, when they really took off. But it's older than that, right?
It is. They did in one sense because materials became available that made it easier, to do stable, tough high heels. So,
okay.
So it does kind of start with the Marilyn Monroe era in modern times, but it goes back a lot further. And in fact, actually, high heels started with men. That long ago, cavalry riders would be on their horses. They'd have to stand to shoot, and so they wore high heels, and the high heels they could embed in the stirrups to stabilize them.
Interesting, because a heel would make it so your foot didn't slide in the stirrup. How interesting. But I never knew that.
I think that one that's always fascinated me, one of my favorite places in the world is Venice. And Venice in the 1500s was one of the most prominent city-states in the entire world.
Yeah.
And they were into fashion, and there came to be a fashion where high heels were the vogue for women. And the idea was that the higher the heel, the more fashionable you were. And one of the reasons for that is the higher the heel, then they wore these long dresses and you had more fabric you could show off, and it really was kind of a neat thing. But
that makes sense.
The heels in Venice got higher and higher. And what I'm going to tell you is historically documented. It got to the point where there were women in Venice who would come to parties wearing heels that would be, how would you guess, how high?
Oh, wow. 6, 7 inches?
24.
Wow, really?
24 inches.
That seemed physically impossible.
It was. It was. And what happened is because, think about walking on 24-inch heels. The women couldn't walk. And so these elegant society women, when they would come to these parties, would have a servant on either side of them propping them up.
Really?
Because they couldn't walk.
You couldn't balance.
Think how ludicrous that is.
Yeah, because barely any of your foot's actually touching.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
They later passed a law limiting them to 3 inches, but evidently they just all ignored it.
Nobody listened. That's it's interesting, fashion, where it's gone, to the ridiculous extents that it's gone, over the years, in different eras. 24-inch heels, man.
Isn't that amazing?
That's funny.
There's in Massachusetts in the 1600s, there was a law that women could be subjected to the same treatment as witches if they lured men into marriage using high heel shoes.
Really?
Yeah, you had to be really careful about that.
Interesting, but they were considered that appealing.
Yeah, and that dangerous apparently. That's
considered
that alluring, I guess. Yeah,
that is so interesting.
In England, they got to the point where again the heels got higher and higher. And the higher the heel, the greater the social status. And so they actually passed a law saying that if you were a commoner, you could only have half-inch heels. If you were in the bourgeoisie, an inch. If you were a knight, 1.5 inches. 2 inches for nobles. But if you were a prince, you could wear 2.5-inch heels.
Really?
Pretty cool.
That's interesting. Yeah. So status was locked in by heel height
heel
too.
Size, exactly.
That's intriguing. I had no idea that there was so much to the high heel. For listeners, again, the book is Ask a Historian, transcripts of Q&As with popular historian Gregg Jenner, links to where you can get it locally and online on our Facebook page. And we'll be back with more of the For the People Book Club and our guest Craig Petersen here in the studio right after this.
I'm Mark Ensign. I'm running as a write-in candidate for an important local election. I'm running to resolve the conflicts between the current county executive and the county council. I'm asking you to write me in as your Cache County executive to restore order, trust, and cooperation to our county government.
Write in Mark Ensign for Cache County executive. Visit ensignforcachecounty.com to learn more. Paid for by Mark Ensign.
This is former Cache County executive Lynn Lemon. I wholeheartedly support Mark Ensign. I hope you will make the extra effort to write him in for county executive.
Did you know a block dryer vent is a real fire hazard? According to the Consumer Product Safety Commission, there are tens of thousands of dryer exhaust duct fires annually, leading to many injuries and death. You should have your dryer hose and the area around it cleaned once a year, and inspect the vent and hose for any blockages at least every 6 months. Don't wait for disaster to strike because your dryer vent is blocked. Give John Henson a call at the Duct Hunter. Call 770-4813 today.
Breathe better, save money, protect your home. We are the Duct Hunter.
This is Police Chief Gary Jensen from Logan City Police Department. A number of scams are occurring throughout our city and county. These scams are highly emotional and demand immediacy that you pay, and you pay now. They will say they are from the IRS, the Sheriff's Office, the Police Department, utility companies, medical facilities, or even romance scams. Slow down and diffuse by asking questions. Be careful. Hang up the phone call is the best thing that you can do, and don't become a victim.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People Book Club with our good friend Craig Petersen here in the studio. Just about 5 minutes left in the show today, talking about Ask a Historian, printed transcripts of Q&As with popular historian Gregg Jenner. We've talked about everything, Anne Boleyn and some myth-busting there. High heels in Venice, Italy. We talked a little bit about how history is written and understood and passed on, and some of the flaws in that system, too. This is a fascinating conversation.
The last one I want to talk about, somebody asked him, if you could do a history, what if history had changed, what would you find interesting? That's a really important historical event. You know, there's a series on Amazon called The Man in the High Castle that presupposes that Hitler had won the war. You and I talked a little bit about a movie called Yesterday, where history kind of changes, and this guy becomes, he has access to all the Beatles music, and he becomes kind of. But
no one's heard them before.
Yeah, exactly. He becomes a worldwide phenomenon. But this story is from 1983, and the Soviet Union. This is during the height of the Cold War. Soviet Union had just shot down a Korean jet for reasons that we still don't quite understand. So it's the height of the Cold War, and in September of 1983, there's this guy, and he's just a soldier in the Soviet Army, and he's in an early warning station. And he gets an automated warning about an incoming missile attack. And these are the days where we're worried about preemptive strikes and will the Soviets strike first, will we strike first, and so on. And the computer data said it was 100% certain that the Americans had launched a nuclear attack on Russia.
Oh, wow.
And this guy has to decide whether or not to. He can't do anything about it directly, but he can alert his superiors. And if his superiors get this, there's at least a probability what they're going to do is say, all right, the Americans attacked us. We're going to launch a responding strike. And missiles take about 25 minutes to get from one location to the other. So it wasn't as if he had a long, long time to think about this.
Sure.
But so the guy looks at it, and he thinks, should I call my superiors? And he notices a couple of things. He notices that there aren't a lot of missiles. There's only 4 or 5, and that they're being launched sequentially instead of all at once. And he thinks, if the Americans were going to do this, the whole arsenal would come, because they don't want to do a half a job.
Yeah.
And so what he does is absolutely nothing. He doesn't tell anybody, and it turns out that what had happened, it was a computer glitch, and that there were atmospheric conditions that caused the computer to misinterpret light bouncing off clouds as a missile attack.
Ooh.
So had he initiated the alarm, there's a good chance that we would have ended up in World War III. There's actually documentaries. He's referred to as the man who saved the world.
I remember
because he
that
did
phrase.
this. Yeah, it's a famous story. And it's kind of interesting. The Soviets,
talk about pressure on the job.
Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah. and the Soviets didn't praise him. In fact, they kind of criticized him because they said, you showed that our system doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's the worst thing you can do, and that is to denigrate
Show
the
a
system.
Flaw. Yeah.
But the what if that the author ends up with is, suppose the guy had eaten some bad tomato soup. He'd had to go to the bathroom and throw up, and somebody else took over.
Someone who would have made a different decision.
Somebody who was a junior officer and had made a different decision, how different the world might have been.
Oh, absolutely. Because the opposite would have played out. We would have responded in kind to an actual attack that was triggered by a non-attack. That's one of the things about history that actually scares me sometimes. When you read about these near misses,
how close it might have been.
Yeah, how close things came to. You talked about these alternate histories, Man in the High Castle, where Hitler won. I mean, there were 3 or 4 times during World War II when things could have gone in that direction, and that scares me. But, oh man, the book again, Ask a Historian by Gregg Jenner, popular historian, a transcript of Q&As covering all these topics. Craig Petersen, our guest here in the studio. And Craig, what's next week? Any plans yet? Not yet?
I haven't got it picked yet.
We don't want to pin you down. Okay. He'll be back with us next month for a new episode of the For the People Book Club. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in. Please join us again tomorrow at 4. Dave Ramsey is next here on KVNU Logan.
Covering all the news. Stay with 610 AM and 102.1 FM. Breaking news and stimulating talk. News Talk KVNU Logan.